In the thick South Carolina swamplands, where Spanish moss droops like funeral shrouds and the air itself seems to murmur of sins long forgotten, stand the ruined remnants of what locals once knew as Angel's Rest Chapel. From 1789 to 1832, more than 200 souls vanished without a trace after seeking refuge in that supposed sanctuary. Church records uncovered in 1923 and sealed straight away by the authorities showed meticulous logs of systematic murder masked as acts of divine mercy. The Witworth family, pillars of their community and operators of a shadowy order of fallen angels, had turned their plantation chapel into the most profitable killing ground in the Antebellum South. What follows has lain buried almost 2 centuries. Yet the truth about America's most sinister religious clan can't remain hidden any longer. Before we reveal the full horror of the Witworth legacy, a warning. This story is not for everyone, only for those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of American history. If you're ready to stand with our community of true mystery seekers, hit subscribe to The Other Door and tell us in the comments which U.S. state you're listening from. We need to see how far these black secrets travel. Now, step back with me into the shadows of 1789 South Carolina, where salvation carried a price no soul should ever bear. But to grasp how such cold-blooded evil could flourish, we must first examine the world that forged the Witworth dynasty. The year, 1789. The newborn United States still bled from revolutionary wounds. In South Carolina's low country, where rice plantations ran endlessly toward the Atlantic, the social order was rigid as the tides that twice daily flooded the coastal marsh. Here, 30 miles inland from Charleston, the Witworth family carved out an empire of deception. Gabriel Witworth, 43 when he bought the 1,000-acre tract he christened Seraphim's Grace, stood an even 6 feet, with prematurely silver hair and winter ice eyes. He carried a commanding presence that made lesser men move aside when he entered a room. His voice, cultured, resonant, could fill a chapel or reduce a grown man to shaking silence with equal ease. Born to Virginia's waning planter aristocracy, Gabriel watched his family's tobacco fortune collapse during the war. Where others saw ruin, he saw advantage. His wife, Constance Witworth Napton, came from old Charleston money, wealth built on the slave trade and rice. At 38, Constance still wore a fragile, ethereal beauty that reminded visitors of porcelain dolls. Her dark hair, always faultlessly arranged, her pale hands untouched by honest callous. Look closely into her brown eyes, though, and you'd notice something troubling. An emptied distance, as if part of her mind had retreated where surrounding horrors could not reach. Each Witworth child was remarkable in a different, disturbing way. Ezekiel, 24 and the heir apparent, possessed his father's cool intelligence with a cruelty even Gabriel sometimes found unnerving. Tall and lean like his sire, his smile never reached those dark eyes. He'd studied briefly at the College of Charleston before being recalled to manage the family's more delicate operations. Miriam, 22, might have been the most dangerous of the lot. Where her brothers used force and threats, Miriam wielded charm and manipulation. She could make a desperate runaway feel utterly safe, while leading them straight to death. Conventional beauty, golden hair, blue eyes, a gentle smile, but something in her manner suggested real pleasure in suffering. The twins, Cain and Abel, had just turned 20. Cain, larger, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked ready to choke a man. Abel, slighter, more thoughtful, his cleverness bent entirely toward devising better ways to extract information from the unwilling. Raised to see themselves as instruments of divine justice, the boys approached their work with the methodical precision of craftsmen. Young Lilith, only 16, was still growing into her role. Blonde like Miriam, but bearing her father's piercing gaze, she possessed an unsettling maturity that made visitors uneasy. Gabriel was grooming her to inherit Miriam's duties in time. In the family enterprise, continuity mattered. Gabriel's brother, Michael Witworth, served as plantation overseer and closest collaborator. 2 years his junior, Michael wore the weathered look of a man who lived outdoors, but his education matched Gabriel's. He knew their operation required both brutality and careful record-keeping. Michael's wife, Ruth, had died in childbirth 5 years earlier, leaving him to raise twin daughters, Mercy and Grace, now 13. The girls lived in the big house with their cousins, receiving the same careful schooling in the family's peculiar theology. The youngest brother, Raphael, who insisted everyone call him Seraph, was 35, perhaps the most chilling of them all. Gaunt to the point of spectral, with prematurely white hair and pale green eyes, Seraph had studied medicine at Edinburgh before the Revolution. His medical knowledge made him indispensable, though he never practiced legitimate medicine. Instead, he used his skills to keep victims alive longer during questioning, and to ensure the bodies they later sold to medical schools appeared to have died naturally. The plantation itself was perfectly arranged for such sinister purposes. The main house, an imposing 3-story Georgian, sat on a slight rise over the rice fields, but the smaller buildings served the true business. The chapel, finished in 1788, stood half a mile from the house, along a path that wound through ancient live oaks draped in moss. Bigger than most plantation chapels, room for 200 though their congregation seldom topped 50, its uniqueness lay in Gabriel's improvements. A basement accessed by a hidden door behind the altar was built as a row of holding cells. Walls thick enough to smother screams, ventilation arranged so occupants could be kept alive for days. Beside the chapel stood a simple outbuilding that looked like storage for hymnals and candles. In truth, it housed Seraph's medical laboratory and the tools of his trade. They founded the Order of Fallen Angels in 1789, selling it locally as a Methodist revival devoted to saving the most desperate souls. Regular services drew neighboring planters to hear Gabriel's fiery sermons about redemption through suffering. The Methodist circuit rider, Reverend Thomas Hartwell, at first welcomed their zeal, allowing Gabriel to hold special services for seekers in deep distress. But the order's hidden purpose ran far darker. Through contacts from Charleston to Savannah and as far as Richmond, the Witworths seeded carefully crafted rumors. Word reached slave quarters that Angel's Rest was a sanctuary, food, shelter, and guidance to freedom. The tales were specific enough to feel true. Directions to the chapel, secret passwords, testimonials from supposed escapees who'd made it north. Such deception demanded coordination. Seraph corresponded with medical colleges in Charleston, Savannah, Richmond, even Philadelphia, building a reputation as a reliable supplier of cadavers for anatomical study. The bodies always arrived labeled as free persons of color, dead of natural causes, complete with forged papers. Early Republic medical schools asked few questions, and Seraph's prices stayed reasonable. Michael ran the practical cover, the legitimate plantation that concealed their crimes, maintaining informants who spread the sanctuary rumor and coordinating with professional slave catchers to identify targets with the highest value. The rice operation itself was moderately successful, employing nearly 100 enslaved people who lived in comparatively better conditions than on many estates. This benevolence was carefully cultivated, Gabriel allowing better food, housing, even limited movement to burnish the family's public halo. The most diabolical element was how they weaponized genuine faith. Gabriel's sermons were moving and erudite, biblical citations, theological polish that impressed educated listeners. He truly believed he did God's work, convinced the souls he shepherded to death were predestined for damnation. That doctrine let the family commit mass murder while preserving their sense of moral superiority. Local authorities sensed something odd at Seraphim's grace, but the Witworths had laid deep roots as community pillars. Gabriel sat on the county commission, gave generously to churches, and hosted fine socials that secured their status. When questions rose about missing slaves or strangers glimpsed nearby, the family showed concern and offered help. The autumn of 1791 brought unusual activity. A string of ruinous storms devastated low-country crops, driving more enslaved people to risk escape. For the Witworths, opportunity surged. In 1 month, 43 desperate souls arrived at Angel's Rest, seeking sanctuary. In that surge, the family's methods sharpened. Ezekiel devised a system to sort arrivals by value. Young, healthy men were kept alive longest. Information about defenses and routes fetched premium rewards from slave catchers. Mothers with children were pressed for details about families planning to run. Their desperation loosened tongues. Older escapees, less likely to know useful routes, were dispatched quickly to conserve resources. The process began the same way. Miriam, gentle as an angel, greeted newcomers, food, clean clothes, a safe bed, explaining the family had to verify stories before aiding the journey north. This waiting period, she said, protected both the escapees and the Underground Railroad. In those first days, the Witworths harvested intelligence through casual talk. Miriam excelled at teasing out details, families left behind, rendezvous points, northern contacts. Gabriel visited daily, leading prayers that revealed more about each person's past and connections. The twins, Cain and Abel, posed as runaways from other plantations, telling fabricated success stories to build trust and prompt fuller confessions. Once they'd extracted all they could, victims moved to the chapel basement. Here, Seraph's medical training proved priceless, keeping subjects conscious and responsive far longer than crude pain would. 5 individual cells, each with shackles and escape-proof design. Soundproofing so perfect, the congregation above never heard the suffering below. Interrogations typically lasted 3 to 5 days. Seraph, a scholar of nerves and pressure points, inflicted maximal agony while avoiding permanent damage that might reduce a body's sale value. Abel assisted, meticulous notes, cross-referencing each revelation against earlier testimonies. What made the operation uniquely effective was its ledgered precision. Gabriel kept detailed books on everything. Each victim received a number and a complete file, physical description, background, intelligence gathered, and final disposition. Those records revealed patterns in routes, identified Underground Railroad figures, and supplied gold-grade intel to their slave catcher partners. They had 3 major catcher outfits from Virginia to Georgia, paying premiums for route details, safe house locations, and planned flights. A single raid based on Witworth intel could pull in thousands, split between family and accomplices. Yet the body trade proved most constant. Seraph's network with medical schools matured into a refined supply chain, preservatives learned in Edinburgh, custom crates, forged papers, free persons of color, dead of fever. Per body, the family earned $50–100, depending on condition and the school's needs. Young Lilith began participating then, first as another friendly face to greet arrivals. Her youth and apparent innocence drew trust from the desperate. Gabriel noticed her lack of visible emotion amid suffering, a sign she could shoulder greater tasks as she aged. The public facade remained the horror's cruelest stroke. Every Sunday, the family attended the local Methodist church, Gabriel often preaching as a lay leader. They hosted dinners, gave to charity, and showed up at every social duty expected of elite planters. Constance became known for exquisite needlework and her talent for organizing ladies' auxiliaries. By 1795, the operation had outgrown Gabriel's original vision. What began as opportunistic profit in the early Republic had evolved into a sophisticated, four-state criminal enterprise. Their success drew like-minded allies, birthing the Southern Redemption Society. Planters, merchants, professional catchers, corrupt officials, even a few ministers sharing Gabriel's twisted creed. Monthly meetings rotated locations, masked as revivals or socials. Members paid dues proportionate to profits, funds expanded operations and bought off officials who might interfere. Dr. Edmund Thorne, a Charleston physician, became one of the society's most valuable members. His legitimate credentials produced death certificates for serifs' natural deaths. Thorne also knew ship captains who ferried specimens to northern schools, keeping the chain hidden. Captain Marcus Fulton controlled an extensive catcher network across the Carolinas and Georgia, specializing in targeted captures based on Witworth intel, sometimes seizing entire families when future escapes were planned. He paid the family a cut of all rewards tied to their information. Most unsettling was Reverend Josiah Blackwood, a Methodist minister covering 3 eastern South Carolina counties. He identified likely escapees within his flock, feeding their names to the Whitworths while wearing a mask of pastoral concern. He even conducted funerals for some victims, citing forged causes like fever. As the society grew, methods refined. Gabriel created a coded correspondence system, letters about spiritual work, that decoded, mapped routes, safe houses, and scheduled flights. These letters surfaced years later, giving historians a detailed blueprint of the network. Serif's role shifted from torturer to what we'd now call a forensic analyst. He profiled escape patterns, pinpointed common routes and seasonal variations, allowing the society to position resources to intercept before genuine safe houses could be reached. The chapel became a training ground. Gabriel taught the theological rationalizations, how to sanctify brutality with scripture. Seraph gave medical seminars, extract pain without obvious marks. Miriam taught manipulation, how to coax cooperation from the terrified. During this expansion, the Whitworths processed around 60 victims yearly. The basement was enlarged to 12 cells. Soundproofing improved. A new crematorium, disguised as a pottery kiln, handled remains that couldn't be sold profitably. They hired 6 additional workers, society members, to manage the increased flow. Lilith, now 18, was fully integrated. She specialized in women, especially mothers traveling with children, adopting a maternal persona that made them trust her completely. She'd tend the children while parents were questioned, sometimes threatening the little ones to force cooperation. The contrast between her nurturing face and total lack of empathy made her perhaps their most effective operative. The twins refined complementary roles. Cain handled the physical plant, facilities, transport, disposal. Abel managed the intelligence archive. Together, they streamlined processing to 48 hours post-arrival, maximizing profit, minimizing risk. But success brought scrutiny. Northern abolitionists began seeing patterns in disappearances. Papers noted how many runaways simply vanished after leaving low-country plantations. Underground railroad conductors reported losing contact with people sent toward the supposed sanctuary. The winter of 1798 carried an unexpected visitor into the South Carolina Low Country. Jeremiah Morrison, a Quaker merchant out of Philadelphia, arrived in Charleston under the polite pretense of arranging new trade with rice planters. In truth, Morrison was on a covert assignment for the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, trying to understand why so many people who'd made it as far as the Mason-Dixon line swore their friends had vanished somewhere in South Carolina. He was a careful man of 45, the weathered sort who had spent years in dangerous places. His Quaker convictions had driven him to risk his life more than once shepherding escapees to safety, and he developed a sharp instinct for deception. The stories drifting out of the Low Country did not sit right. Morrison's inquiry began by questioning successful escapees in Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. Testimony after testimony revealed the same outlines. Many had been told about a sanctuary named Angel's Rest, a place to find food and direction. Some had actually reached the chapel but left quickly, saying something there felt wrong. Others had sent loved ones on and never heard back. Weeks of cross-checking details, dates, places, descriptions, brought a clear pattern into focus. People were disappearing at a precise spot in the South Carolina marshlands, but proving it would require infiltration, and Morrison knew his complexion made him a poor choice for such work. The answer came from an unexpected quarter. Samuel Washington, a free black man from Baltimore educated in Pennsylvania, volunteered to pose as an escaped slave seeking passage north. Light-skinned enough to pass for mixed race, explaining both his learning and refined manner, Washington was fearless, with prior experience conducting similar missions in Virginia and Maryland. He arrived in Charleston in March 1799, carrying forged papers that named a fictitious Virginia planter as his owner. For several weeks he labored by the day, quietly gathering word about local underground railroad contacts. It did not take long before whispers of Angel's Rest found him. The approach was slow and deliberate. Washington let news of his plight spread gently through the network of those hoping to flee. Within a month, a contact delivered directions to the Witworth plantation, and the passwords needed to prove he was a genuine seeker. Meanwhile, Morrison embedded himself in Charleston's business circles, using bona fide merchant credentials to pull at threads, shipping ledgers, medical college correspondence, any document hinting at unusual traffic. His discovery chilled even his seasoned mind. Consignment records showed regular shipments from South Carolina to medical schools up the mid-Atlantic. The volume far exceeded mortality among the region's free black population. Local doctors' death certificates displayed suspicious repetition. Too many fevers, too many transient free blacks. Washington's mission began on a humid April evening as he approached Angel's Rest along the stated path. The building matched the rumors perfectly, larger than a typical plantation chapel, Gothic windows oddly foreboding in the dim. Spanish moss hung from the oaks like shrouds. The stagnant tang of flooded rice fields clung to the air. Miriam Witworth met him at the door, her smile warm, welcoming and dangerously perfect. She was as beautiful as the tales claimed, golden hair, eyes that appeared to glow with compassion. Washington felt the hair rise on his neck. Her manner felt rehearsed like an oft-repeated scene. "You must be exhausted," Miriam murmured, leading him inward. "Come, eat, rest. Tomorrow we'll speak about your road north." Inside, stained glass portrayed violent scenes of judgment ill-suited to a Methodist sanctuary. The altar was heavy dark wood. Behind it loomed a painting of the Archangel Michael casting devils into fire. The place felt theatrical, built to stir fear, not comfort. He was fed, given clean garments, and shown to a small room beside the chapel. Miriam explained that the family verified every story before helping anyone continue north, a precaution to protect him and the network. This waiting seldom took more than a few days. On day 2, Washington met the other Witworths. Gabriel played the benevolent patriarch, leading prayers, offering counsel. His oratory was powerful, references to liberation and redemption perfectly tuned to desperate ears. But troubling signs mounted. Other guests seemed hushed and evasive, avoiding eye contact. When Washington tried drawing them out, origins, roots, next steps, answers turned vague and contradictory. Most unsettling was their look toward the family, gratitude laced with fear, as if they knew more than they dared say. On his third night, Washington woke to sounds that froze his blood. Muffled screams, faint through thick walls but unmistakably human, rose from somewhere beneath the chapel. He lay motionless, listening as the cries dwindled just before dawn. When he asked about the noise, the other guests claimed ignorance. Washington understood he was in mortal danger, yet he also recognized he might be the only witness capable of exposing the machine behind these walls. He began mapping everything: buildings, paths, faces, habits, especially the fates of those who entered Angel's Rest but never departed. The break came when he saw Sheriff Witworth loading a wagon with wooden crates of a size and heft that could contain human remains. The careful, almost reverent way the cargo was secured said the contents were valuable. Washington shadowed from afar as the wagon rolled to a landing on the Ashley River, where a small steamboat lay waiting. But he had been observed as well. Abel noticed the curiosity and reported up the chain. Gabriel judged their guest too inquisitive and ordered him moved to the basement. Washington's investigation was about to become a personal fight for survival. His descent revealed the scale of evil beneath the chapel, a facility far beyond what he imagined. 12 cells, a full medical laboratory, and a crematorium disguised as a kiln. The odor of death hung like a drape. Stains marked the walls in ways no scrubbing could erase. His cell showed the signature of prior occupants, scratches where fingernails had raked stone, and darker patches he refused to identify. The space barely allowed him to lie down. Ventilation was a mean slit near the ceiling. Within hours, whispers from neighboring cells reached him. Some had been held for weeks, kept alive just long enough to divulge routes, contacts, and planned flights. Others were new enough to still believe release might come. Interrogations began at once. Seraph worked with surgical method, anatomy as an instrument of pain, maximizing agony while sparing sale value. He asked detailed questions about Underground Railroad funding and structure as he applied precisely measured torments. Washington's education made him especially valuable. The family suspected ties to Northern abolitionists and wanted names, finance channels, and organization charts. But Washington had prepared for such a moment. Training in Philadelphia had included resistance techniques. His Quaker discipline gave a deep well of inner steadiness. He offered mixtures of falsehoods and partial truths, plausible enough to buy time while he searched for any opening. Help surfaced from an unexpected soul. Grace Witworth, one of Michael's 13-year-old twins, had been assigned to carry food as part of her education. Unlike her kin, Grace looked truly disturbed by what she witnessed. Washington gently engaged her in those brief visits, building trust, sowing doubt in the doctrine she'd been taught. She was bright, able to see wrong for what it was, but had been raised to believe their victims were predestined for damnation. His calm theological counterpoints, paired with his manner, shook her certainty. Most crucially, she began to perceive him as fully human, not a specimen. They shaped a desperate plan. During her next delivery, she would leave the door unlatched, allowing him access to Seraph's instruments. With a scalpel under darkness, he would navigate the grounds and steal a boat on the river. The plan collapsed almost at once. Grace's odd demeanor had caught Mercy's eye. She reported to her father. When Washington pushed the door, Abel was waiting, pistol in hand, smile like a knife. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" he sneered, gesturing back to the cell. poor little Grace believed she was saving your soul. Instead, she's guaranteed your end will be worse than we planned." Though the attempt failed, Washington learned something vital. Fissures cracked the family's united front. Grace's sympathy suggested others might harbor doubts. Equally, the failure forced the Witworths to speed his disposal. That night, voices carried from the laboratory, Gabriel and Seraph debating how to handle their perilous captive. Gabriel wanted every scrap of intelligence first. Seraph argued the man's wit made him too dangerous to keep. They agreed to one final session, methods likely to prove fatal. Washington had one move left. He offered to provide detailed intelligence about abolitionist financing and organization in exchange for a swift death rather than drawn-out torture. Tempted, Seraph paused. Such information would be gold to Southern Redemption partners. What Seraph didn't know, Washington was buying time for a rescue in motion. Morrison, alarmed by his partner's silence, had begun discreet inquiries around Angel's Rest. Word drew in other abolitionists in Charleston, including free black workers familiar with plantation rumors. The rescue came at dawn, fog drifting off the Ashley in a perfect coverlet. Morrison's small team of volunteers had spent weeks planning, studying the grounds, guessing the prison's location. 2 other Quakers from Philadelphia and 4 free black men from Charleston formed the strike group. They set a diversionary fire in a rice processing building. As family and workers rushed to the blaze, Morrison's team slipped into the chapel, found the hidden door, and descended. What they uncovered surpassed their worst imaginings. 11 people still living in the cells, Washington among them, barely conscious from the last session. The lab held ledgers documenting more than 800 murders, correspondence with medical schools from Charleston to Philadelphia, maps of compromised routes, letters naming conductors and safe houses. Most damning was Seraph's medical journal, torture methods catalogued as enhanced interrogation research, a meticulous ledger of human endurance, pain thresholds, and procedural effectiveness. They had intended to flee at once. Washington, injured but lucid, insisted on collecting as much evidence as possible. He helped select the most incriminating records while others readied the prisoners for transport. They had perhaps half an hour before the family doused the fire and discovered the breach. The documents would eventually expose not just the Witworth machine, but the entire Southern Redemption Society. Letters revealed parallel operations in Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia, false sanctuaries built on the same template. The conspiracy's reach dwarfed Morrison's fears. Gabriel had not built an empire by ignoring contingencies. Once he recognized what had happened, he triggered escape plans. Routes laid long before, and allies ready to shield them. Political connections proved the family's shield. Gabriel's years of cultivating judges, sheriffs, and legislators paid off. When Morrison presented evidence to local authorities, it was dismissed as Northern propaganda, meant to inflame sectional tension. A few officials who took the claim seriously met overwhelming pressure from patrons. Federal officers in Charleston were more sympathetic, but jurisdiction tied their hands. Crimes committed wholly within South Carolina rested under state authority. That cooperation never arrived. Worse still, the Methodist hierarchy balked. Despite overwhelming proof, leaders hesitated to condemn generous benefactors. Reverend Hartwell called the charges a northern plot against Southern Christianity. Within 6 months of the raid, the family liquidated Seraphim's Grace and relocated west, Alabama territory, where oversight was even thinner. A fresh chapel, a fresh underground. But Morrison's work had already fractured their larger network. Spooked members torched records and vanished. Dr. Thorne fled to the Caribbean. Captain Fulton disappeared. Reverend Blackwood pivoted into genuine repentance and began denouncing slavery from the pulpit. The Alabama phase marked an escalation. The new plantation, New Seraphim, rose 20 miles north of Mobile along the Tombigbee, perfect for shipping. Gabriel redoubled political courting, donations, parties, favors. Within 2 years, he sat on the territorial council and had say over law enforcement priorities. The chapel's undercroft was more advanced, cells for 30 prisoners, improved ventilation, superior soundproofing, and a laboratory surpassing any seraph had run. They diversified their cover. Knowing false sanctuaries alone were risky, Gabriel obtained a slave trader's license. Legal trafficking disguised the illegal. Problem slaves, escape attempts, rebellious spirits, or valuable skills were his specialty. Such people fetched premiums. Their disappearance could be explained as a sale to distant lands. Ezekiel added a particularly cruel refinement. He purchased people specifically to wring out intelligence, then sold them to remote plantations, from which escape was near impossible. Double profit with lasting damage to the Underground Railroad. Their Alabama network sank roots deep. Territorial leadership was dominated by men from Georgia and the Carolinas, many sympathetic to extraordinary measures. Not a few planters became silent partners, sharing intelligence for a cut. Miriam married Captain James Patterson, a former naval officer turned riverboat master. His vessel, the Sweet Salvation, became the artery, bodies northward, captives to remote holdings. Lilith, now 22, emerged as the sharpest operative. Apparent innocence and beauty opened doors at every social level. She cultivated boat captains, merchants, and even federal officials, each convinced he was her only confidant. The twins ran complementary side businesses. Kane's mobile blacksmith shop, specialized in restraints and transport rigs, sold across the region. Abel peddled curious specimens to medical schools and collectors. And Seraph's notebooks darkened. His enhanced medical research now anticipated in awful outline medical crimes the next century would infamously repeat. By 1805, word of the Alabama operation reached northern networks. Morrison, haunted yet relentless, tracked the family's movements in exhaustive reports. Those dossiers drew attention in Washington City. Secretary of State James Madison grew concerned that such enterprises threatened national stability. Still, territorial Alabama posed hard problems. Local power was southern, federal jurisdiction narrow. Unless the scheme violated interstate commerce or federal treaties, locals could stonewall. The crucial break came through Samuel Washington's informant web inside the slave trade, boatmen, warehousemen, and a few disgusted overseers. He learned the family planned a major expansion. Gabriel had negotiated steady anatomy contracts with medical schools in New Orleans, Richmond, even Boston. To meet quotas, nearly 200 people a year would be killed, making Alabama the largest murder-for-profit engine in American history to that point. Worse, Gabriel was recruiting partners across the Deep South. Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, franchises of false sanctuary plus legal trade. If successful, the network could process thousands annually. Morrison concluded ordinary law would not stop them. Local officials were bought or terrified. Federal reach was weak. That left direct action. An audacious plan took shape. Infiltrate New Seraphim, gather evidence, rescue prisoners, and time it to coincide with a major society convocation, capturing leaders and documents in one sweep. Washington insisted on leading the infiltrators despite Morrison's fears. His scars, physical and spiritual, were permanent, yet his insight into the family's psychology made him indispensable. A 12-man team assembled, Quakers driven by conscience and free black volunteers who understood their freedom depended on destroying the machinery enslaving their kin. All knew the risks. All were prepared to die. The infiltration began in autumn 1807. Washington and 3 teammates arrived in Mobile posing as Georgia slave traders. Their legend was watertight, forged papers, hard-to-check references. Washington's education and complexion let him pose as a mixed-race freeman serving white principles. Companions played the role of profit-seeking Southern businessmen. They spent weeks earning credibility, attending auctions, touring plantations, building rapport. Their aim was a meeting with Gabriel, now known as a specialist in difficult cases. Morrison set up in New Orleans, investigating the medical schools receiving Alabama shipments. What he found was worse than expected. Not only were the numbers impossible to justify, but some professors were requesting specimens with specific patterns of trauma. The academy was not merely blind, it was complicit. The meeting occurred in December 1807. New Seraphim glittered with criminal wealth, massive main house, formal gardens, outbuildings rivaling the best estates in Virginia. The chapel, outwardly humble, dwarfed its South Carolina ancestor. Gabriel had grown stout and confident. Miriam carried her second child. Ezekiel had married into a planter clan. Lilith was engaged to a territorial judge's son. Gabriel spoke first of the legitimate trade, his method for acquiring difficult people below market and reforming them for profitable resale. Then, almost lazily, he let the curtain slip, his medical school connections, his intelligence network for preempting escapes, his theological ruminations about souls predestined for damnation. It was the same perverted creed. Murder dressed as duty. A tour of the property laid out the system. A vast undercroft with cells tailored to prisoner type. A laboratory whose equipment would impress any medical college. Charts of anatomical lessons learned through pain. The family's casual tone was the worst of it. They spoke of human beings like livestock, comparing restraint designs and disposal methods. Lilith demonstrated apparatus with brisk competence. Even Constance, once fragile, now discussed business matters with quiet resolve. Washington's team was invited to stay several days to observe. Access that rich brought leverage and lethal risk. The breakthrough came when Gabriel allowed Washington to sit in on an interrogation, a young man captured en route to Pennsylvania. Seraph conducted the session with the same cold measure Washington remembered, except now he saw it as a trained observer. The torrent of intelligence extracted was staggering. Safe houses, conductors, resupply caches, names of free black communities offering aid, all collated into reports shared with catcher networks across the region. But Washington noticed something Gabriel missed, tiny cues that the prisoner was salting falsehood into truth. Educated and brave, the young man misdirected even under hellish pressure. That resistance sparked hope. The railroad could adapt. The visit coincided with preparations for the Society's annual convocation, nearly 30 members from across the Deep South, the largest assembly since the group's founding. Perfect for documentation and perilous for spies. They arrived under cover of a religious revival. Newspaper notices touted a Methodist conference on redemption and practical Christianity, with glowing testimonials from planters. Faces Washington recognized appeared: Dr. Thorne, back from the Caribbean, Captain Fulton, now operating in Mississippi, and astonishingly, Reverend Blackwood, supposedly reformed in South Carolina. The gathering represented the Antebellum criminal elite. Planters, merchants, catchers, physicians and officials, all wearing respectability like a mask. Formal sessions met in the main house, framed as seminars on predestination and divine justice. Real business happened in corners, intelligence exchanges, coordinated responses to abolitionist pressure, expansion plans. Gabriel's keynote laid bare his ambition: new false sanctuaries in Louisiana Territory, facilities able to process larger numbers, and his most chilling idea, industrial-scale redemption, killing and processing centers operating at volume. Seraph showcased enhanced research methods, experiments to map endurance limits, procedures no honest physician would attempt, preservation techniques to keep specimens viable on long routes. European markets had begun to nibble, but pressure mounted. Investigations increased, the railroad adapted. Members fretted about safety and longevity. The network's success had made it a marked target. Washington's most critical find, the Society's acceleration plan. Rather than shrink, they'd expand operations and refine evasion, front businesses, deeper corruption of officials, and the systematic elimination of witnesses. Gabriel had drawn up a kill list: abolitionists, escapees, and investigators slated to disappear. Washington's own name sat there, with Morrison's and others. Fortunately, Morrison's strike force was already in place beyond the fences, synchronized to hit during the convocation: maximum heads, maximum papers. Before dawn on January 15th, 1808, the assault on New Seraphim began. Positions were taken with precision based on Washington's maps, perimeter covered, approach routes marked, the Undercroft's entrance targeted. Federal marshals from New Orleans lent lawful teeth. 6 soldiers from the garrison added force. 24 men in all. Morrison and 7 abolitionists. Washington and 3 infiltrators, 8 marshals, 6 soldiers. They carried the latest firearms and warrants signed by territorial judges, persuaded that the operation menaced federal authority. Twin breaches, main house and chapel, prevented document destruction and trapped society members. Morrison led the chapel team, finding 17 prisoners below. Their condition provided irrefutable testimony. Washington secured Gabriel's office. The paper trove defied belief: ledgers tallying over 1,500 murders, correspondence tying partners in 12 states and 3 foreign countries, route maps of railroad lines systematically gutted. Worst of all, Gabriel's personal journal, long theological expositions justifying each death, side by side with prophet columns. He had recorded everything, convinced divine sanction demanded neat bookkeeping. Seraph's lab yielded atrocities beyond murder, research notes on living subjects, preserved specimens that would later become unanswerable exhibits, letters from professors requesting particular injuries. Arrested society members named operations in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. They pointed at officials on the take and spelled out methods for keeping them bought. The conspiracy had seeped into every layer of Southern life. Gabriel, when confronted, did not deny. He attempted to sanctify predestination, justice, duty, and bragged openly of efficiency. The absence of remorse made him perhaps the most chilling criminal in early American annals. The courts revealed the era's limits. Territorial law and jurisdictional knots snarled prosecution. Witnesses vanished, killed by remnants of the network. Others recanted under threat or bribe. Local Alabama authorities balked. Evidence was illegally obtained, federal intrusion unconstitutional. A cohort of planters raised defense funds, framing the accused as martyrs of Southern autonomy. Trials dragged for 3 years, becoming a symbol of the swelling sectional rift. Gabriel was convicted of murder and hanged in 1811. Many family members and partners wriggled free on technicalities, intimidation, and politics. Seraph fled to Mexico with his notes, later rumored in 1834 to be a mysterious doctor in Texas experimenting on captured Comanche. Never confirmed, but chillingly consistent. Ezekiel and the twins were convicted on lesser charges. sentenced long, then quietly released after 2 years through political pull, resuming crime under aliases. Ezekiel set up in Texas. The twins ran a body-snatching ring supplying southwestern medical schools. Miriam and Lilith evaded charges entirely. Captain Patterson ferried them to New Orleans. From there they vanished into the city's cosmopolitan churn. Later, Whispers placed them in Mexico City, running a bordello that eliminated wealthy patrons and sold their remains to researchers, never proven, yet utterly in character. Constance was judged incompetent, institutionalized immobile, and died in 1819, never again speaking coherently about the family's deeds. Exposure of the network forced the Underground Railroad to reinvent itself. Routes long trusted had to be abandoned. Conductors found themselves watched, their names gleaned from Witworth ledgers. Yet the revelations also galvanized the North. Newspapers printed Morrison's reports in detail, systematic torture and homicide cloaked in ministry. The case proved slavery's defenders would go to any length. Samuel Washington became a leading voice, telling religious audiences exactly what he had endured, how theology had been twisted to sanctify murder. His witness converted many Northern Christians from neutrality to obligation. Morrison kept digging, documenting parallel schemes in Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina, helping shape the methods of modern investigation. The cost to his mind was terrible. He died in 1825 at 62, still haunted. New Seraphim was abandoned after Gabriel's execution. The chapel burned, arson by unknown hands, in 1815. The main house stood empty until a storm toppled it in 1847, leaving only foundations. Historians now estimate the Whitworths and their network killed at least 1,800 people from 1789 to 1808, counting both direct victims and those captured through intelligence wrung from torture. The true number may be higher. Many records were destroyed. The case stands as one of America's earliest documented instances of systematic murder under a religious guise. Gabriel's theology as weapon foreshadowed later cults and extremists. His success in maintaining public respect while committing atrocities showed the corrupting force of religious authority when bent to criminal ends. The medical dimension exposed a troubling bond between legitimate institutions and crime. Several renowned schools accepted specimens they knew, or should have known, were murder-tainted. Outrage spurred reforms and early ethical standards for anatomical study, though enforcement lagged for decades. Organizationally, the Witworth Network anticipated modern crime syndicates. Records, routes, profit tracking, and intelligence-led targeting a century ahead of their time. Those same ledgers would teach lawmen how to dismantle conspiracies. Most of all, the case laid bare the young nation's legal weakness. Without strong federal authority, crimes crossing jurisdictions or protected by local politics could flourish. The ability of the Witworth clan to dodge full punishment, despite overwhelming proof, argued for a sturdier national justice. It also illuminated how deeply slavery had warped Southern society by the early 1800s. That respectable planters, officials, and clergy could shield mass murderers revealed a moral blindness born of systematic dehumanization. The full truth may never surface. Many papers burned, others sit sealed in archives never completely mined. Alabama folklore still murmurs of disappearances during the family's tenure, hinting that the documented portion is only a fraction. Archaeology at the New Seraphim site has been limited, stymied by local resistance and land disputes. Yet 1990's ground-penetrating radar traced underground structures matching the chapel's undercroft. Evidence the physical remains of the crime machine still lie buried. Research has uncovered hints of the family in Texas, Mexico, even South America, passenger logs, school records, and territorial files citing known aliases tied to suspicious acts. The enterprise may have persisted under new names long after Alabama fell. The darkest possibility is that the Witworths were not alone. The methodical shape of their system and the breadth of respectable support suggest other families or orders might have done the same without ever being exposed. Scattered records of disappearances, revival movements, and curious deaths across the antebellum South could point to additional networks. What remains certain, the Witworth story is among the blackest pages in American religious history. It shows how sacred language can be twisted to sanctify cruelty, how social esteem can shield monsters, how slavery's logic rots the moral core of a culture. The legacy extends beyond the immediate dead. Intelligence stolen under torture led to the capture and killing of countless others whose names we will never know. Medical education was stained by complicity, and the family's partial escape taught other criminals that mass murder could hide in plain sight with enough paperwork and political friends. Today the site of New Seraphim lies mostly forgotten, visited by local historians and the rare researcher of shadowed Americana. No monument marks where more than 1,000 died. No plaque honors the abolitionists who risked everything to expose the truth. The silence itself warns how easily societies bury their shame. The Witworth tale endures as a warning against religious extremism, racial hatred, and the corruption of moral authority. It reminds us how quickly civilized communities can slip into barbarism when profit or power demands it. Knowing this history is not morbid curiosity, it is a safeguard. The question that gnaws isn't whether the crimes occurred. The evidence is too heavy. It's how many other operations just like it existed, how many died unseen, and whether the whole truth will ever be unsealed. The shadow of the Witworths still darkens corners of our understanding, leaving us to wonder what else sleeps in dusty archives. In the end, the family's macabre saga testifies both to the depth of human depravity and to the courage of those who stood against it. Gabriel and his kin reveal the abyss. The abolitionists who pried open those cellar doors embody our best selves. Their fight teaches that the price of civilization is vigilance, especially against villains cloaked in scripture, office, or social grace. The chapel bells at New Seraphim have long since gone silent, but the echoes of the victims' suffering still reverberate through American time. Until we face crimes like the Witworths plainly, we cannot claim we've reckoned honestly with our past, or learned enough to recognize such threats in our future. What chills you more? That systematic evil could hide under a minister's stole, or that so much may still be sealed away? Tell us your thoughts below. And if this dark chapter has opened your eyes to how far people fall when conscience is abandoned, subscribe to The Other Door and tap the bell. Not everyone has the stomach for these truths. Those who do join a community sworn to make sure such horrors never masquerade as holy again. Until next time, remember, the most dangerous criminals are often those who convince themselves they serve God.